Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be learning a PESACH class. PESACH is tomorrow. I'm going to be leaving with my husband to meet my family. I'm so excited. A lot of my siblings flew in from Israel, and I'm excited for PESACH. I'm excited for the meaning of this holiday. I'm excited to spend it with my family. So I hope that you have a really nice, fun, exciting PESACH coming your way. Even if you're not with your family, PESACH is such a special time. That's why I want to prepare with you guys right now. Okay, so every year I talk about the Jewish women of the Pesach story because I don't think anyone really understands what the Jewish women, obviously the whole Jewish nation, but I mostly cater to Jewish women, what they went through and what they overcame. And we're going to I'm going to segue into that in a minute, but there's something that we don't really talk about usually that I'm going to talk about this time. Before we talk about what we didn't talk about, I want to talk about how this week on Instagram, I had a really eye-opening week. I've been sitting and thinking a lot, and it's something I want to open up with more women. There's no shame in this. It's so important to talk and discuss things and share how we feel, even if that feeling is negative. Assimilation. Assimilation is a massive part of the female story of the Pesach story, of the female part of the Pesach story, which no one really talks about a lot. And this week on Instagram, I asked a very simple question to my followers who are mainly women. I asked the women, I said, if you used to cover your hair, you guys know I'm covering my hair now with a wig. We Orthodox Jewish women, that's what we do. We cover our hair. It's one of the 613 mitzvos of the Torah. I asked women, if you used to cover your hair and you don't cover it anymore, why did you stop? And I could not have expected the answers that would come in, because the women did not only stick to covering their hair. I got hundreds of messages from Jewish women all around the world, mostly America, telling me how hard it is, and I wasn't expecting this, how hard it is for them to continue their religious Orthodox Jewish life, covering their hair, wearing modest clothing, and they're hurting and they're in pain, and there is no shame in talking about this. We Jewish women, are the backbone of the Jewish people. We are the soul of the Jewish people. We always have been. We always will be. And these topics are important to talk about if women are suffering or struggling in these areas, and that's okay. I got so many messages from so many women telling me that, by the way, we think about assimilation as this thing like Jews are embarrassed to be Jewish. That's not the only way that assimilation happens. That's not the only way assimilation expresses itself, because a lot of Jewish women are proud of their Judaism and they're slowly feeling more and more distant from their Judaism. Assimilation, yes, it can look like you're embarrassed of your Judaism. You don't want to look different. You don't want to be different. You don't want to eat different. It's hard to be different. Every psychologist will tell you this. It's human nature. We don't want to be or feel different or look different. And there's other things that make Orthodox Judaism or hard. But just an example of, before an example, being embarrassed of your Judaism is not the only way for assimilation to happen. It can also be something that is subconscious, that happens unconsciously, where you slowly become more and more distant from your Judaism, from your relationship with God, from your soul. And it happens without you even noticing. And it could be because keeping the mitzvos are hard. You're not learning enough. Life is very busy. Maybe it is that kind of like, I'm embarrassed of my Judaism, which is not a bad thing. It's okay. It's human nature. It's normal. And it's not as extreme as it might sound. It might just be women. I know sometimes when I go to the gym or the beach and I'm the only one that's modest or wearing something different and people look at you, it's kind of uncomfortable. I'm kind of immune to it at this point because I'm 26 and I've been doing it for many years, specifically going to the gym. When everyone's in like their leggings and their sports bras and I'm in like a long shirt and a long skirt and whatever it is. But it's not easy. It's hard. And I want us to talk about this. And this is a huge part of the Pesach story. Whenever we need, I really believe in these ancient Jewish dreams about Mashiach and the prophets. I believe that they're real, and the Torah, I believe that it's real. I believe God is real. Not all the time. I sometimes have those moments where I'm like, wait, is it all a lie? Am I losing my mind? What is this? Where is God? What is God? What is this Torah? But deep down, I know that it's everything to me. And, it's very important for us women because we know from our history that we women are the backbone of the Jewish people. We are the saviors of the Jewish people. We are at the forefront. We're at the front of bringing Mashiach and reminding the Jewish people of who they are. If we women forget who we are, how will the Jewish nation ever remember who they are? If the ones at the forefront, the Jewish women, are disconnected from their soul, that is the foundation of all assimilation. Even the unconscious one, where you're just growing more and more distant from your soul. How will the Jewish people make it into Mashiach if we women are not remembering who we are and not in connection to our soul? This is a massive part of the Pesach story, and I want to go into it now. Before we go into the assimilation part, I talk about this every year, and I never get over it. Every single year, I am absolutely blown away by how women are everywhere in the beginning of the Pesach story. They're just like boom, boom, boom. The Jewish women just are sprinkled all over the pages of the Torah when we're talking about the beginning of the Pesach story, when the Jews are in slavery, all of a sudden, like nonstop. And by the way, this is kind of rare because unfortunately, women are less represented in the Torah as men. We know that the Torah was written in a different time. We'll get into this another time, this whole Jewish women being present in the Torah. We'll talk about that in a different class. But there are Jewish women everywhere. You cannot escape them in the beginning of the Pesach story. And I talk about this every year, and everyone's like, Rachelea, you always talk about this. But there's a new facet here where they were up against a deadly force. We know the men were up against a deadly force, right? Pharaoh wanted to kill all the boys, but we don't really necessarily talk about the women and what they were up against, and we will in a minute. But before we do, I want to show you how Jewish women are absolutely everywhere. And I'm telling you, this is God telling us there is no redemption without the Jewish women. If they don't pave the way, there is no way. There's no way. If the Jewish women do not pave the way to redemption, there's no way that redemption can ever take place, because we are the soul of the Jewish nation. And I'm going to read you something that's going to prove this to you, that we women are the soul of the Jewish nation. And if we don't remember who we are, there is no path to redemption. That's what I think based on the studies that I've done, that I'm doing now. Number one, we open up the Exodus, which is the second book of the Torah, where we talk about it's the end of Yaakov, Jacob, and his sons. They've all passed away, and the Jews are now in Mitzrayim. And all of a sudden, they're growing and growing and having babies and big families, and Pharaoh gets very worried and concerned, and he becomes this murderous king who wants to enslave the Jewish people and eventually genocide the Jewish people. And in the midst of this, and it's heartbreaking because the Jewish people are crying. They're crying out to God under crushing labor. They're enslaved. They have no morale left. They have no dignity left. And all of a sudden, the Jewish women come pushing through. And again, we're going to talk about this threat of assimilation in a minute, which no one really talks about because it's kind of like a hidden secret in the Torah. But we start off with the Jewish midwives. Boom, 2 Jewish women right out of nowhere. We're talking about the Jewish people enslaved, how they're crying out to God and they're dying and they're desperate and they just want to feel human again. And boom, right away, 2 Jewish women. We start off with the midwives, Shifra and Puah. Now the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one whose name was Shifra and the second who was Puah. And he said, when you deliver the Hebrew women, when they have children and you deliver them, and you see on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall put him to death. If it is a daughter, she may live. Remember this verse, we're going to come back to it. The midwives, however, feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them. And they enabled the boys to live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, they defied Pharaoh. And honestly, I'm surprised they weren't killed. Why have you done this thing, he said, that you have enabled the boys to live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are skilled as midwives. When the midwife has not yet come to them, they are already given birth. Next, another Jewish woman. So we went from Shifra and Puah. All of a sudden, boom, we have Yocheved. We go straight into another Jewish woman. Yocheved, Moshe's mother, comes on the scene. A man of the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi, who was Yocheved. The woman conceived and she bore a son. And when she saw that he was good, she hid him for 3 months. This is Moses. When she could no longer hide him, she took for him a reed basket, smeared it with clay and pitch, placed the child into it, and put it in the marsh in the Nile's edge. Boom, we have Miriam, straight into the next Jewish woman. Miriam, his sister, stood from afar, Moses' sister, to see what would be done to him. Boom, another Jewish woman, Batya. Batya was the daughter of Pharaoh, and we know from the Talmud that she actually converted to Judaism. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe to the Nile, and her maidens were walking along the Nile, and she saw the basket in the midst of the marsh, and she sent her maidservant, and she took it. Now Miriam is back, another Jewish woman. It's just nonstop. The story of Pesach starts off, is pioneered. It is paved with women everywhere, the same women, different women, like entangled in each other. Miriam is back. His sister said to Paro's daughter, shall I go and call for a wet nurse from the Hebrew women so that she shall nurse the child for you? Now Batya, Yocheved, and Miriam all appear at the same time. Paro's daughter said to her, go. So the girl, Miriam, went and called the child's mother, Yocheved. Paro's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. The child grew up, and she brought him to Paro's daughter, and he became like her son. She named him Moses, and she said, for I drew him from the water. And it doesn't end there. The Midrash and the Talmud now go straight. I'm telling you, it is absolutely, it just like fills my soul. It electrifies me to see how women really take over the story of Passover, of Pesach. There are hardly any men in the beginning of the story besides Paro. It's all women, and it means something, and we'll get there in a minute. But let's read this Talmud, this piece of Talmud together. We're in Talmud Sota 11b, Masechet Sota. We're going to talk about how the Jewish women seduced their husbands, because we know their husbands were, also the women, were enslaved and probably didn't feel like men anymore. And the women knew that God was real, and they would come to find that God would come and save them and find them and redeem them, and they didn't want to give up. So they found a way to seduce their husbands. Rav Avira taught, in the merit of the righteous Jewish women that were in that generation, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. He tells of their righteous actions. At the time when these women would go to the river to draw water, the Holy One, blessed be He, would materialize for them small fish that would enter into their pitchers, and they would therefore draw pitchers that were half filled with water and half filled with fish, and they would then come and place 2 pots on the fire, 1 pot of hot water for washing their husbands, and 1 pot of fish with which to feed them. And they would then take what they prepared for their husbands to the field and would bathe their husbands and anoint them with oil and feed them the fish and give them to drink and bond with them in sexual intercourse between the sheepfolds. And this is what King David was talking about when he stated in Psalms, when you lie among the sheepfolds. And when these women would become pregnant, they would come back to their homes. And when the time for them to give birth would arrive, they would go and give birth in the field under the apple tree, as it's stated again in Psalms. Under the apple tree, I awakened you. So now the Talmud is going into bringing in Jewish women into the story. It is all women. They are making the Passover story happen. Now Rashi talks about Jewish women in the beginning of the Exodus story. He's quoting a midrash. For when their husbands were tired through the crushing labor, they used to bring them food and drink and induced them to eat. While the men were eating and drinking, this is ancient biblical flirtation. I'm not even joking. I love it. It's amazing. The women would take out their mirrors and glance into them with their husbands. And they would say, I am more attractive than you. And the men would reply, I am more handsome than you. In that way, they would arouse their husband's sexual desire, and they eventually became fruitful and multiplied. So we see the women at work. The beginning of the Passover story is a story about Jewish women. Now, I talk about this every year, and everyone kind of knows this. Yes, there's women all over the story, but they are up against a deadly force, an influence that can end and extinct the Jewish people, and we see them overcome it. What is this deadly force? What is this influence that threatens to end the Jewish people that they are overcoming? By the way, we know again that we know that the Galos Mitzrayim, the exile of Mitzrayim, was the prototype. It was like the blueprint for every other Galos exile that the Jewish people will ever go through. We're in an exile right now, and we know that just like the Jewish women saved the Jewish people in Egypt, we Jewish women are in charge of paving the way to redemption again now, in every time, in modern times. And we don't have time to go through every time it happened, but I want us women to be conscious and aware, not to assimilate unconsciously, not to assimilate at all, to remember who we are, just like these Jewish women did, to be in touch with our souls, to be proud of who we are, and be absolutely determined to overcome any influence that threatens to influence us. Because we have to remember who we are, because we are the spine of the Jewish people. Now, we're going to jump to Exodus chapter 2, verse 15. Vayomer Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Mitzrayim said, Pharaoh said, Lem Yaldos Ha'ivrios, to the Ivri to the Hebrew midwives. Ashar Shem ha'acha Shifra. He was speaking to one whose name was Shifra. V'Shem ha'shen is Pua. And he was speaking to the second one whose name was Pua. Vayomer. And he said to them, Biyaldechen es ha'ivrios. When you help these Jewish women have children and they're in labor and you're laboring them. Ureisen al ha'avnayim. Im benhu. And if you see on the what is it called? Not the threshold, the birthing stone, sorry. Im benhu, if it is a son, v'hamisen also. You have to kill him. Remember, we know this. Pharaoh was telling the Hebrew midwives to kill all the Jewish boys. Ve'im bashi v'chaya. But if it is a daughter, you must keep her alive. No one ever really talks about those last 4 words. Ve'im bashu. And if it is a girl, a daughter, v'chaya. And you shall let her live. What does this mean? Pharaoh is telling the midwives, keep them alive so that we Egyptians can then influence them and raise them in the way of Egyptian life. We want these girls, we don't want to kill them physically. We want to murder them spiritually. We want to destroy the soul of the Jewish people. The Jewish women are the soul of the Jewish people, right? We know also that a child's Jewishness is determined by the mother's Jewishness, not by the father, because we are the soul of Am Yisrael, of the Jewish people. I'm going to go into a text written by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, spoken by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Okay. Osam hamitzriim shenitztavu lahamis eskufam shel yalda Yisrael behashlachasam layaor. Those Mitzriim, those Egyptians that were commanded by Pharaoh to kill all of the Jewish boys by throwing them into the Nile, nitztavu lahamis es nishmasam shel yaldei hapleta hanoseres. They were also commanded to destroy and murder and slaughter the soul of the leftover children. Who were the leftover children? The girls. Al yedei chinucham be'orach hachayim hamitzri. How were they going to murder the souls of the leftover girls who were not killed by being thrown into the Nile? Al yedei kach shehem hamitzrim yichyu osam bedarcham heim. How would they do this? Pharaoh told the midwives, keep the girls alive, and then the Mitzrayim will kind of push them forward in life. How? By integrating them into Egyptian society. That is what Pharaoh wanted for the girls. Aleichem, Anshe Mitzrayim, it is up to you, people of Mitzrayim, lahachios as she'eris hapleta, to keep alive the rest of the children, lahavi lahem chayim, to bring them life, right? We know in a different verse, Pharaoh tells the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, kol haben hayilod hayaora tashlichuhu. Every son that is born, by the way, also of the Egyptians, throw him into the Nile, v'chol habas techayun, and every single girl you will keep alive. He was speaking to the Egyptians. There's 2 verses. One he's speaking to the Egyptians, and one he's talking to the Hebrew midwives. To the Hebrew midwives, he just said, let them live. And to the Egyptians, he said, you should keep them alive. He told the midwives, let them live. Don't touch them. Don't harm them. And then he told the Mitzrayim, keep the Jewish girls alive. Keep the Jewish women alive. How? By absolutely obliterating any connection that they have to their soul. That is how you keep the Jewish women alive. It's another way of slaughtering them, of killing them, of obliterating their identity. The boys were physically murdered, and the girls, the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians tried to spiritually murder them. That is exactly what Pharaoh tried to do. There's a reason he didn't want to kill the girls, right? He still wanted the Jewish people in Egypt because they were like all the labor that they had. Their economy was based on Jewish labor. He didn't want the whole Jewish nation to be murdered. He needed them. So he killed the body, and then he tried to obliterate the soul. The body was the men. The men were killed, right? They were thrown into the Nile, the boys, and the girls were the women didn't let it happen. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the women were supposed to be integrated into Egyptian society to the extent that they would forget they were Jewish. And now let's go back to the story of the women. What it took for them. I'm telling you, I believe that's why God made the Torah this way, with like boom, 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 Jewish women everywhere. You lose track. They come at the same time. They leave at the same time. They come back. They're coming. It's crazy. Jewish women everywhere. And it's never like that in the Torah again. It's the only place where like multiple women are taking charge of a story. It's because they were under a threat of assimilation. And they absolutely refused it. They rejected it with all of their heart and soul. They said, no, it's not going to happen. And they literally paved the way to redemption. Without the Jewish women of Egypt, the story would never have happened. We would have literally just slowly assimilated into oblivion. I want to read you guys a quote from the Arizal, who is one of the founders of Kabbalah. He wrote, "The souls of the final generation before Mashiach's arrival," which is now, right? That's us, "are reincarnations of the souls of the generation of the Exodus." I want us to think about that. I'm not a person who will ever tell a woman, you have to cover your hair, you have to dress modest. You guys know me. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably know me better. I'm just a firm believer in discussing these things, because I do believe, with all my doubt and all my inner heresy when things go south, I do believe the Torah is true. And we women have a big job. We have a big job. It is proven throughout the Torah that without the women, there is no freedom. There is no Jewish identity. There is nothing without us Jewish women. And we cannot allow assimilation to happen unconsciously, where it's not even that we're embarrassed. Because I know everyone's these days so proud of their Judaism, but we just slowly stop feeling connected. And we just drift further and further from who we are, from emes, from truth. And the Jewish women of Mitzrayim teach us to not let that happen, and do whatever you need to do. Hang out with, create a Torah club, learn once a week, learn a little bit more. Honestly, that's my biggest piece of advice, to learn more Torah, even 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a week, just to remind yourself of who you are. We Jews are in the midst of a galus, of an exile that is very painful. We can feel it more than ever with the war happening in Israel. Our enemies are still trying to obliterate us like they were thousands of years ago. And we Jewish women are called upon to serve, to connect to our souls in every way that we know how, and in every way that we can, so that we can carry the Jewish nation to Geula, to redemption. Happy Pesach, everyone. And I hope that you experience freedom in every sense, in every way that you need. Wherever you're feeling constricted or restrained, I pray and I hope and I bless you that this Pesach just obliterates those restrictions and those constraints and those limits on who you are. And connecting to your soul as a Jewish woman, as a Jew in general, is the most liberating thing that can ever happen in this lifetime. So, Chag Sameach, happy Pesach, and stay in touch. Mwah. Bye.